This property last year generated over $73,000 in top line revenue for us. Okay. Now, a lot of people in the space, the conversation would stop right there. Okay. And they would just say, we made 73 grand. And then, look at how cool it is, right?
Right.
What we show people how to do is we want to look at this as through an actual business, right? Because everyone loves to do the addition. No one shows you the subtraction. Long story short, off of $73,000, we ended up taking, in terms of profit generated for our business, just shy of 24 grand. Okay. So when you do the math on that, margin of 32%. This property did just shy of $134,000 in revenue for us last year. So break that down, that's roughly 11-ish grand a month, give or take. So not too shabby, right? Again, a lot of the numbers you're going to see here are almost very identical to what you're going to see on some of the past examples. Okay. Now, just diving a little bit further into this, this property actually generated, bottom line after all expenses were paid, just shy of 70 grand to the bottom. So over a 52% profit margin for us. So this is a very, very good unit for us in our portfolio. So again, without going through every single one of these line items here, the viewers can see really quickly how our portfolio, like I mentioned earlier, that did over 3.1 million last year, is how that's currently constructed.
Wanted to bring you guys on here earlier in the year. Everyone is kind of looking at the goal setting for 2023. Everyone's looking back and, in retrospect at 2022. What did they do right? What did they do wrong? What's in store for the year ahead? So we wanted to bring you guys on as experts in the, the DIY, the self-management space. Let's do a year in review. Let's kind of kick off 2023 by taking a look in the rearview mirror. What did you guys do in 2022? Let's dive into some of your properties. You guys are obviously going to be generous with your time today. We know this is not going to be a quick video, but you guys are going to pull back the curtain, lift up the hood, and show us the properties in your inventory, is my understanding, and talk about the numbers, how you guys got there, the property types, and really get granular. So let's talk about 2022 year in review, if you can give me that.
Sure. Yeah. So 2022 was a very up and down year, you could say. It was the best year business-wise we'd ever had by a milestone. Personally, as some people may or may not be aware on the channel, we lost Katrina's dad back in June. So it's just and then just a few months later, we had our baby girl, Chloe, born. So it's very whiplashy in terms of emotions. But overall, from the business standpoint of things, it was a phenomenal year for us. We did more than $3.1 million last year across the portfolio. We more than doubled our bottom line profitability as well, which was huge for us. Got much more strategic, much smarter in terms of expenses, trimming the fat, finding efficiencies and things that we were doing. So, we can definitely walk through a number of different examples today just to give the audience some further insights to how that happened and things we're looking into for 2023 and beyond, so we can stay ahead of the curve. So I think this is going to be a fun call. So
yeah, no, absolutely. So I know you were planning on kind of kicking this off, and let's take a look at your portfolio. I know that you've got kind of them mapped out in some specific areas. Now, you guys typically stay regional. You're up there in Canada. If you could kind of just give a lay of the land, and obviously we can pull some of your properties up here on the screen share, and if you would just dive into them however you see fit.
Absolutely. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen here, and we can just take it kind of step by step here. So if you can see my screen, just give me a thumbs up, Michael. Yeah. Okay, perfect. So where we're located, so we're in Canada, and where I'm on right now, this is Airbnb. Now, obviously, as we talk about and have spoken about on many past episodes we've done with VIP, it's not the only platform we're on. We're multi-platform. We have lots of different exposure from a number of different advertising channels, but Airbnb is obviously the juggernaut that people go to first when they think about short-term rentals. So if I zoom out on the map here, we are currently located in just our home province here in Canada. So we're actually spread across 3 different markets. So what I can do is I can just zoom in a little bit just to give a little bit more perspective. So we have properties down in the Canadian Rockies, in Canmore, Alberta. It's a very small little town. There's only about 10,000 people that live there, but absolutely beautiful. Should definitely go if you've never been there. It's lots of fun stuff to do there. This year, we actually started expanding into Calgary. So we currently only have 1 unit there currently, but our home base, if I just go a little bit further north here, the overwhelming bulk of our portfolio is actually located in Edmonton, Alberta. Now, the question always comes up about, well, what part of town, location, where should I look to set up my, and as you can see here, we have a pretty wide, stance of where we operate. We're kind of all over the city, but we can get into reasons for why that is and how that ended up happening. But at large, that just gives you kind of an idea of where we're geographically located. Now, diving a little bit more specifically into this. Now, this is actually an internal property list, and I just want to give the viewers a little bit more of a breakdown of how our portfolio is currently constructed and set up. Now, I've hidden the addresses and postal codes just for obviously confidentiality reasons for the business and our clients, but this just gives you an idea of how everything is broken down. So we do talk about many different structures of ways that you can do short-term rentals. So we talk about rental arbitrage, we talk about the partnership model, and also ownership, okay? Because those are really, there's lots of different names that you can dig into and lots of terms that get thrown around in the industry. Those are really the three main strategies of what you can use and implement in order to acquire units in this industry. So taking a look at our total portfolio here, this is in Edmonton. We have it organized by quadrant depending on where it is in the city. If viewers want to pause and do a little bit more digging, that's totally fine. Then we have Canmore and Calgary here. Now, Calgary, we just started picking up units there. That's going to be a major focus for us this year to really start diversifying across different markets. But when I did the math on it, it was actually pretty interesting because our portfolio is primarily made up of partnerships. So just for the viewers, just to give some examples, because again, we're throwing around a lot of terms here. There's three different ways that you can acquire units in the short-term rental industry. So there's rental arbitrage, which is rather than buying a property and paying a mortgage to a bank, you can simply assume a lease as a tenant to a landlord. And rather than paying a mortgage, you're actually just paying a lease agreement every month. And you simply resell the dates at a higher price than what it costs you to pay your lease and fixed expenses every single month, okay? You can own property, nothing wrong with that at all. It's obviously a great long-term strategy, holding and owning real estate. A lot more capital intensive though, right?
Sure.
So for a lot of people that are looking to get into short-term rentals, that's where they typically go first. And what I would say from a scalability perspective, awesome strategy to own, but you're just not going to get your goal as fast as you would ideally like if you're just focusing on ownership, okay? The way we discovered was the fastest way to scale was actually with our partnership methodology. So how that essentially works is rather than having a mortgage or having a lease or really having any overhead, so to speak of, you essentially sign a management agreement with a client. And rather than paying and having all this overhead, you just essentially split on the amount of revenue or income that you generate for that person by managing their property as a short-term rental. What's unique about that approach is, and what we show people how to do in BNB Bootcamp, is we show you how to set these up where you don't have really any overhead. You can actually negotiate to have the homeowner pay for the cost of the furnishings, and you're not tying up your capital with a deposit. You can literally get new units into your portfolio with having $0 invested into the asset. But on the back end of it, because we're charging a fee based on the amount of income we're producing, we're essentially creating infinite return on investment, which is a really exciting proposition when you really dive into it, right? So
anything infinite profit-wise, gets your attention fast.
Big time, yeah. So obviously, you can kind of see just based on the numbers here of how our portfolio is constructed, where our preference is. And this is really unique because with the market environment, we are very likely heading into 2023. A lot of people are forecasting it could be a challenging year economically speaking. Everyone's throwing the recession word out there. Again, what's unique with partnerships is it doesn't matter if the economy is going great, if the economy is doing bad, because you don't have any overhead, really, so to speak of, when you're under a management contract, you really don't have anywhere near the level of risk from a business standpoint because you don't have all of these fixed costs, leases, mortgages, all of these things to really concern yourself with. So you can probably, when you look at it from that perspective, you can see why we're so partial to having partnerships. Now, taking it a level further, because we wanted to, this is actually a really interesting exercise that you guys had given us in terms of getting the actual breakdown of the portfolio. We have focused a lot on multi-unit type units in our portfolio. So that makes up, nearly half of the types of units that we manage. So that's anything from duplexes to triplexes to quadplexes, anything that has more than one unit on a single property. The next biggest one is, single family homes. That's where we're particularly fond of as well. Those tend to have the highest income potential, especially if you can, have a very unique design on top of it as well. So again, without going through every single one of these line items here, the viewers can see really quickly how our portfolio, like I mentioned earlier, that did over 3.1 million last year, is how that's currently constructed. Now, final thing I'll say on this before we jump into some specific examples, we have a very deep penetration in our market in Edmonton, Alberta. Now, you can argue from a risk standpoint, that's probably where our biggest exposure is in our business currently. We know that. We know we need to start diversifying into different markets in order to really lower our risk. And that's something we're really going to be focusing on in 2023, is starting to expand outside of our own sandbox. So
now, when you're talking about mitigating risk by moving into multiple markets, are you talking about from a regulation standpoint? I'm not overly familiar with the permitting and regulation in Edmonton. Is it heavily regulated? Because actually, in my short-term rental markets, I prefer heavy regulation. I prefer, that it's very structured, because what I don't want is to get in there and it's the wild, wild west, and then 6 months later it goes south, which we've seen happen. Lake Tahoe comes to mind. What's the regulation like in Edmonton that makes you nervous about having all your eggs in one basket there?
So, it's fairly simple in Edmonton. You essentially just have to apply for a business license, submit an occupancy permit plan of how you're actually going to be operating the property. So essentially just how are you going to be handling garbage? How are you going to handle noise and be a good neighbor to the adjacent homes? How are you going to handle parking around the property so that's not causing issues for people that live in the neighborhood? So personally, I don't really see that changing anytime soon. The city has made their stance pretty clear on where they see, short-term rentals and the role that they play in terms of tourism activity that it generates for the economy. I don't see that happening in terms of, seeing major shifts, but you always just want to prepare, because, what happens if they do, right? You can wake up one morning and you don't want to, all of a sudden you're in business today and not tomorrow. So again, that just helps us sleep a little bit better at night, just having a little bit more diversification across different markets. So no, and I love that, and we certainly subscribe to that here and advocate for that on the channel, is to obviously just plan, and if you, and ultimately the plan is for not, you've still planned and you've still diversified like you guys are intending to do. So I think that's great. So in that same vein, you guys are looking at obviously spreading out into multiple territories. It sounds like from a risk mitigation standpoint, amongst other things. Geography is obviously, one of the critical elements in deciding where you're going to have a short-term rental. Why that particular geography, a particular property type obviously is going to come into play, whether it's a single family, whether it's a multi-unit, down in Disney, Florida, down there we play the bigger the better, the 8, 10, 12 bedroom homes. But like in Nashville, Tennessee, for example, what really books well there is going to be the 2, 3, 4 bedroom condos right downtown. So you're going to be looking at the right property type, also in the right geographic location. So those are two components of it. And then within that market, who's your target demographic? Is it a vacation destination like a Disney, for example, or you mentioned the Canadian Rockies, that would be a tourist destination. That's how you guys are selecting those. And then based on all of that, you're determining what type of strategy, whether it's going to be the arbitrage, whether it's going to be the partnership, or whether it's going to be an outright purchase. And we've already touched on that. If you could touch on the other three, and then we'll talk about specific property types that you guys have in your portfolio. It's a really great question, Michael. I'm glad you asked that. So in all honesty, in terms of why things ended up the way we did, how they have essentially over the last 4 years when we got this started. We're from Edmonton, Alberta, so it made the most sense for us to start in our own backyard and to really have that proof of concept before we started to take what we've learned and then start to branch out into other markets. But it just so happened, just by happenstance, that the market that we live in happens to be very short-term rental friendly. And people always ask us the question, it's like, who the hell goes to Edmonton, Alberta? Because I'll tell you from experience, this is not a place you come to when you want to work on your tan, right?
Right.
So,
Right.
I mean, our first deal, I mean, we started small. We started this 4 years ago. It was a small 2-bed, 2-bath condo, just to have that proof of concept. We actually still have it to this day. It's about 10 minutes down the road from us. But as we start to really understand the market that we had, really started to understand the different dynamics of what goes into why people come here, the type of demographics and things that we're looking to serve. In terms of how that ended up working out, when we did our initial analysis on our own backyard within Edmonton, what we discovered really quickly was that the overwhelming competition and the other competitors in our space were in kind of that 1 and 2 bedroom condo, and everyone was pushing into the downtown core. So earlier on the video, you may have noticed on the map, we don't have a lot of inventory in the downtown core. It's not to say you can't make money there, but typically when everyone is moving in one direction, we like to kind of take the opposite approach and do something that's a little bit different. So within our market, what we noticed very quickly was there was not a lot of quality inventory of nice single family homes where multiple families could house themselves under one roof and be able to share that cost. So because there is that sharing cost component, we discovered also very quickly that we could charge a very generous nightly rate and from a business standpoint, generate a very nice profit for the company that we're currently managing here. So in terms of how that ended up really evolving from there, one thing that we've discovered within our own market is, and this is something we're really going to be pushing into for 2023, we noticed there's a huge need for insurance claim type bookings. And we'll walk through an example of one of those a little bit later on the call here. But anytime there's a fire, there's a flood, someone has mold remediation needs, you could lock up a property for 4 to 6 to 8 months in some cases at in pretty insane monthly cash flows. And like I said, we'll get into a more specific example just to give the audience an idea of how profitable that can be. So, I mean, in terms of how we started, we started on rental arbitrage. We did that for about the first 5-6 deals. We ran into a little bit of a snag with it because although it is, yes, significantly cheaper than obviously buying a property, paying a mortgage to a bank, when you still have to sign a lease, put up a deposit, and also potentially pay for furnishings, there's still some capital intensiveness to that. So when we really learned and discovered how we can scale our portfolio without having to do any of that, without having to sign leases, without having to put up deposits and pay for furnishings, when we learned how partnerships really work, that's when our business really started to take off. So the overwhelming amount of properties that we have in our portfolio currently, particularly with Edmonton, is mostly single family homes, mostly multi-unit type complexes, duplexes, triplexes, quadplexes. And it's been a good ride for us so far. Now that we've had the experience, we really understand what it looks like from a business standpoint. We're taking that proof of concept, and then that's when we started to get into some of these other markets, and we can walk through the rationale or reasons for why we did that a little bit later. But does that give some, I guess, context around the question? Or
yeah, no, it absolutely does. I mean, we want to know, how you guys got your start. Obviously, you're coaching others expertly right now, but everyone wants to know what your origin was. So you guys started obviously with your first property, like everyone else does. You guys started with the arbitrage model, and you're up to how many properties in the portfolio at this point?
At the time you and I were talking, we're in the mid-50s right now.
Yeah, and I just found out something recently that I thought was really cool. In talking to one of y'all's students, is that the proof's in the pudding for you guys. Like I said, there's all these gurus and influencers out there that talk the talk, and maybe they're not walking the walk. You guys actually show your net income off of the properties in your portfolio to potential or prospective students before they sign up, letting them know that you guys are the real deal. I thought that blew me away. A lot of people just don't have that kind of transparency, because most of them aren't actually doing the deals that they're talking about and that they're preaching. So kudos to y'all on that. I thought that was really neat. Guys, if you're interested in coming on board, or at least finding out if they're a good fit for you, go ahead and email BNB Bootcamp at VIPfinancialeducation.com. We'll drop a link to that email below. We'll drop a link to their playlist so you can check out video after video that we've had them on here for years, talking about the ins and outs, the day in the life, what exactly this coaching model consists of and how they can assist you to achieve your goals. And be sure to include your first, your last name, the best number to reach you in the body of the email, and BNB Bootcamp Conversation in the subject line. And someone from Michael and Katrina's team will be back in touch with you ASAP. Well, thanks for sharing kind of your methodology and your recipe for how to find these houses, where and why ultimately. Can you dive into a couple in your portfolio and kind of dissect them for our audience here?
Absolutely. Yeah, I'd be happy to do that. So the first example we'll walk through is actually a property that is literally within walking distance of our personal residence, because one of the things we always like to instill in terms of a mindset with our students that come into our training is that opportunities in this industry are literally everywhere. Like they could literally be across the street from where you are at right now. Okay. Mm-hmm. So we wanted to challenge ourselves a little bit, but it just so happened once we did a little bit more digging into this particular property we're going to get into, it ended up being a home run for us. So what we're going to do is I'm going to show you a full year's worth of financials from January to December 2022 and kind of take you behind the curtain and show you exactly how this particular property performed and some of the different dynamics that are in play. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and pop my screen up here. So this is a single family home. It is a 3-bed, actually, 3-bed, 2.5 bath. Like I said, literally, I could walk to this property from where I live in about 5 minutes, okay? But one of the things we always like to encourage our students on is you don't just want any property. You want to try to find something that's unique or has some kind of characteristic about it that's not easily replicatable or easy to copy necessarily. So one thing that jumped out at us on this particular home, and you can potentially see it in the picture here, this home actually backed onto a pretty nice water feature and nice walking trails. So there's not a lot of stuff in this area that has that kind of characteristics. So it ended up making the property stand out a lot more compared to some of the comparable properties in the area. Okay, but diving into the actual financials, so this is an actual statement from January to December 2022. Now, obviously, just for confidentiality for the client that we managed this property for, we took the address out, just to be totally transparent there. But this is essentially how the year turned out on this particular property. Okay, so as we talk about on VIP, we are not just on Airbnb. We actually are diversified across a number of different booking channels because, again, you don't just want to have all your eggs in one basket for a market. You also don't want to have all your eggs in one basket on a particular platform either, because what happens if one day Airbnb decides they don't like you anymore and then all of a sudden your hosting account is shut down? We're fortunate that hasn't happened, but we had a student that actually they woke up one day and they were locked out of their account for about 48 hours and scared the actual shit out of them. So yeah. So anyways, not to digress, this property last year generated over $73,000 in top line revenue for us, okay? Now, a lot of people in the space, the conversation would stop right there, okay? And they would just say, we made 73 grand and then look at how cool, right?
Right.
What we show people how to do is we want to look at this as through an actual business, right? Because everyone loves to do the addition. No one shows you the subtraction, okay? Now, this deal was actually really interesting, Michael, and I'll explain why. At the start of the year, this was actually a rental arbitrage property for our company, okay? We were paying rent to the landlord and anything we made over and above that, or utilities and fixed costs, that was ours to keep, okay? But what ended up happening was this deal actually converted into a partnership a little bit later in the year. What happened was the homeowner came to us. They were in a little bit of a pickle. They were going through some personal stuff. They were going through a divorce. Their spouse was being unreasonable. She needed to get a different mortgage on here to get her costs down. Without getting into all the nuts and bolts of it, she said, well, I know you guys manage, and I need to be making more on this property than what I'm getting currently in rent. And I said, I'm sorry, I can't do that because I have an investor in this property, and part of the earnings from this, I'm actually paying back because they actually fronted the cost of furnishing. So I have to take that into account. So long story short, what ended up happening, I came back to the homeowner. I said, listen, the only way I can make this work is I will sell you the furnishings on this property so that you own them. because that's how it typically works when people want to have their properties managed for us. They would pay for the furnishings. So she ended up cutting us a check for, because as you can see, the property is high end, it was furnished very nicely. She ended up cutting us a check for $35,000, bought the furnishings from us. We then took that money and then went and got another unit that is also like 2 minutes away from my house, so that my original deal that I had with my investor remained intact. And think about this, it was a win-win-win scenario. So the homeowner won, because as soon as we converted this to a partnership where she actually got more upside, she was actually getting more money than she was anticipating to get, which she was super happy about because she needed to be making it. My investor was happy because the deal we had with him continued on, just simply at a different address. And obviously we were happy because, well, we got a check for $35,000 and we were able to make all of this work, right? So what was the difference for her as the homeowner with the arbitrage? So basically, just she's leasing it to you, you're on a lease, versus the partnership model where she's taking 50%. Right. Yeah. So in this case, what ended up happening, it converted from a lease agreement where we were paying her $2,000 a month for rent, and she was wanting to increase the rent to like $2,500. And I said, listen, based on the comparables in the area, that doesn't make sense for my business to do that. The only way we can achieve that is we actually partnered together. You own the furnishings, and then we just simply split on the amount of income the property makes. So what we ended up landing on was a 75-25 deal, where 75% of the earnings go to the homeowner. We keep 25% as a management fee. Now, obviously, in this model, there's fluctuations, there's ups and downs depending on the time of the year, but her average monthly earnings jumped from $2,000 a month to, on average, around $3,000 to $3,200. Some months I was cutting her checks for like $5,500 on this property.
So, I mean, that goes to show you right there, when your students are approaching these homeowners, I mean, you're talking about, over a 50% increase, just, actually you're saying went from $2,000 up to over $3,000 a month?
Correct. Yeah. I'm talking in terms of like a monthly average. I mean, like there's some months were significantly higher. There was other months in there where we may have been even slightly under that, but it all ends up, it balances out if you look at it from a longer term perspective.
Well, I mean, even if you just use an additional 50% return, there's not a homeowner out there that's willing to take a look at this, that's not going to get their attention. So fantastic. I mean, for the first deal out of the gate, that's a smoker.
Yeah. So let's just kind of dive into this a little bit further. Okay. So yeah, we had $73,000, and change in top line revenue. Now let's go through some of the subtractions. Okay. So obviously, if we're going to be advertising on these major OTA platforms, there's costs. Okay. So we have the service fees from Airbnb. They take 3% of, the booking value. So if you make $100, they take $3. So you get, as a host, $97 out the back end. Okay. We're on booking.com as well. For anyone that is potentially looking into it, tread lightly. It's a very tricky platform, but you can make a pretty great deal of money from it. They charge 15%. So it's a little bit different. We go into a lot of detail in our training on how to account for the differences in commissions the sites charge. But again, let's just go through it line by line here. We have a very lovely cleaning team that comes through after every single guest. So obviously got to pay them. Okay. We have a few different softwares we use to manage and create a lot of automation capabilities. So automating guest messages, automating reviews, automating scheduling of cleaning staff, anything that can provide increased efficiency to just ease the burden of day-to-day management. We try to install that and make it a lot simpler. Now, as you can see here, the rent or lease, that's where this is actually accounted for right here. So that $2,000 a month we were paying, there's 1 month, I think, where something had to happen on the property. We just deducted it from the homeowner's rent for, just a maintenance bill that was outside the scope of what we would be responsible for. But you can see that exactly right here in this line item. Okay. Stripe merchant fees. Okay. So we have direct booking revenues. So when we're taking direct payments, we have to pay fees as a company in order to have the merchant services. Okay. Got to pay people to come and shovel snow and, mow the grass anytime. Because obviously in winter
it snows in Canada, right?
Yeah, it does a little bit. Yes, it does. Yeah. So that's accounted for right there. That's actually within our partnership model. We actually have that on the homeowner. So this was actually only billed just for a few months before we ended up converting it into the new partnership model. You're going to have some of the odd time where things need to get fixed up on the property. Okay, so that's all accounted for right here. Supplies, paper, toilet paper, paper towel, Kleenex, shampoo, conditioner, things get consumed in the property. Final thing is VRBO booking fees. It's just the commissions that you pay to the online OTAs. Okay, so that gives us a gross profit of just shy of 51 grand, give or take. Okay, now getting a little bit further into this, we'll just rip through this a little bit quicker. Garbage disposal. We actually have a company that comes and picks up garbage for us every single week. If I told you what they charge, Michael, you would probably fall out of your chair, but it's an absurdly good deal of what we get with
I
these
mean,
guys.
I'm looking at 228.96 and they're coming weekly. That is a good deal.
It's great. They must just make it on volume, because I can't understand how they actually make money charging what they charge. Yeah. So internet, this is now actually paid for by the homeowner, but we covered it for the first few months of the year. Had to pay a business license. You can see that expense right here. And then of course, utilities, but now that's also covered from the homeowner as well, because we converted it from rental arbitrage into a partnership. Right. Management fees. So all the money that we were paying to the homeowner, that is blended up into that total there from the partnership splits. Resolution adjustment. Well, sometimes guests get mad and you have to give them money. Okay. Sometimes that happens, but long story short, off of $73,000, we ended up taking, in terms of profit generated for our business, just shy of 24 grand. Okay, so when you do the math on that, margin of 32%.
Yeah, I don't know anyone that's going to be upset about that type of a return. So, I mean, basically you're getting approximately $2,000 in net positive cash flow. Once you converted it into that partnership, you were obviously not responsible for the utilities at that point anymore. You were reimbursed for the upfront investment on the furniture. So your bottom line was about $2 grand a month on this deal. That's fantastic. You won a bunch of those, I'm sure.
Yeah, so I mean, in terms of like coming into 2023, not much we would change with this. From a company's strategic management perspective of when we're looking at what deals are we going to keep, which ones are we going to try to make adjustments to try to fix them, which ones are we just, what are the bottom performers and what are we going to cut? This one, nothing we would change. Let's just, we just keep operations going, and this is a fantastic deal for us. So hence why it's still in the portfolio.
Yeah, absolutely. So you just mentioned some that you're trying to potentially cut, or in 2023 you guys are going to be more laser focused on certain property types versus the other, or potentially trimming the fat in your own portfolio. I'm not sure exactly what you're referring to there, but could you speak on that a little?
Sure. Yeah. So 2022 was an interesting year for us because we had a lot of growth as a company, and our portfolio definitely increased in size, but we also reduced a lot of units that we had. So going back and looking on it, we actually added more than, I think it was 27 units last year. We actually ended up getting rid of about 11 units out of our portfolio. So net growth was around 16 units year over year. Why did we get rid of them? Well, what we always talk about with our students, we always like to have this framework of what we like to call the headache to income ratio. Okay?
I love that.
Okay? And there's two different components. It's how much money are you making relative to the pain in the ass factor of actually managing the property, right? And over time, and this might shock a few people, not everything you try as an entrepreneur always works. Sometimes you have an idea, sometimes you
most of the time it doesn't work. There's a stat out there, I think it's 90% of all new businesses fail inside of the first 5 years. So to your point, if being an entrepreneur were easy, everyone would do it.
100%. So, I mean, what we ended up doing, because we do this fairly often, when we were doing a full-on review of the portfolio, you have that 80-20 kind of dynamic going on, right? Where it's like 20% of the units end up making, the oversized, outsized gains for, the overall average. And then you have 80% of the portfolio that's not really making a lot of money. So from a business growth perspective, it's like, okay, well, we can clearly see which ones are working, case in point, on the screen right here. The ones that were not working, where if they're not making enough money or logistically they're just a challenging property to manage. One of the other reasons why we like to manage single family homes compared to condos, as an example, we had a condo, we did the numbers on it. Over a whole 12-month period, this condo in our portfolio we're talking about $2,000 a month here. As a company, we actually only ended up making around $250 for the entire year on this condo.
Wow.
So you can imagine why it's no longer under management from Peak Properties.
Yeah, that's addition by subtraction. Absolutely.
So you can see, well, the other thing that was interesting with that particular unit was the outside doors locked at 7 o'clock at night, and our check-in was at 4 p.m. So, and now, of course, we'd have this disclosed on our list saying, hey, we have a very tight check-in window. You need to make sure you get here. Otherwise, you have to wait for the outside doors or someone to enter or leave the building. Because the other problem was this management company did not allow us to have an exterior lockbox. And here's the thing, Michael, is not everyone always reads. Okay. So we would have people show up to the property at 8, 9, 10 o'clock at night. They were trying to get in. They'd be waiting 20, 30, 40 minutes. And it was just a disaster. So it's just like, headache is through the roof, not making money, goodbye.
Yeah.
Right. So, but those are the tough decisions you got to make as a business sometimes, right? I mean, the landlord, nicest guy in the world, loved working with him, but it wasn't serving our interests. So we parted ways as friends. And it's funny, the units you get rid of, you never think of them ever again. And the amount of mental real estate that it frees up for you is tremendous. So.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I've seen that movie before myself. So fantastic. Let's dive into another one if you don't mind.
Sure. So one of the questions we get all the time is it okay, or should I maybe consider looking at managing a property that's remote? That's not, for someone that's brand new, we typically recommend they start in their own backyard just to get some experience under their belt. But depending on where a student may be located, that may not always be possible or may not always be the best idea, just depending on what local regulations, what have you look like, okay? Now, as I mentioned earlier on this call, we are managing or starting to manage a property for actually a client of ours in Calgary, okay? So we call this the Daffodil House. It's a very unique property. It's a 1910 vintage, so it's got a lot of historical characteristics to it. We really speak to this in the listing in terms of the history, the uniqueness, how it really stands out, and some of the different factors in the neighborhood, all these different things. But you'll probably notice, the reviews we've had have not been that fantastic. Okay, now we're going to get into the financial statement in a moment here, and this is always someone's deepest fear. If they're managing a property from far away, what is the worst possible case scenario that can happen? So let's talk about it, because we had a very interesting year so far in this property. Now, diving into the financial, we have actually been managing this property from about July last year until present day today. But one of the biggest challenges we had, so I want to paint a picture for you, Michael. So within Calgary, every year, there's something called the Calgary Stampede. Have you heard of Stampede before?
Well, there was I think a pro football team years ago, the Calgary Stampeders, right?
Okay.
That's all I know.
Yeah, okay. The Calgary Stampede it's a big deal. It's a big deal in Alberta. Like, basically the whole city shuts down for almost like 2 weeks, and people just get all kinds of, people go crazy over it, right? So we had this booking where, now overall for like 6 months, we did, 38 grand on it. Not too bad. But what really missed the mark on this particular property, we had a booking come in for around a 2.5 month period over the peak season of the year for $40,000 just off one booking for 2.5 months. Okay.
Wow.
We were ecstatic. We were spiking the football. We're like, man, this is so great. This is amazing. What ended up happening within 1 week of us having that guest check in the property, because I mentioned earlier, this is a 1910 vintage home, a pipe burst in an interior wall of the property, completely flooded the basement, and we had to give almost all of that money back.
Wow. Okay, that is the worst case scenario. Yep.
So what do we do? Well, I mean, what do you do when you have a problem? You just start tackling it, right? So what ended up happening, we ended up getting a remediation company in there. Now, because this is a partnership deal, our business did not experience the costs of having to actually restore and bring the property back to its former condition. But from an opportunity cost standpoint, we lost on a huge amount of revenue, absolutely
Sure.
huge amount of revenue. I mean, $40,000, like those kinds of bookings don't come around all the time.
Right.
So anyways, sorry, go ahead, Michael.
Did you guys get the property back after it got restored?
Yeah, so it was down for about a month, give or take. It was a real mess, but we ended up getting operations kicking over and turning again. And overall, this has still been a relatively decent unit for us. So getting into kind of the nuts and bolts, this deal is a partnership. So it wasn't kind of like the last example where it was a quasi hybrid of rental arbitrage turning into. This is 100% a partnership deal. So we do not have a lease. We had no deposit, and for all the furnishings that you see in this property, we did not pay for them. Okay, that was actually covered by the homeowner in this particular case, and it's actually a good friend of ours. So anyways, getting into the details. So this property over a 6-month period still did a respectable, just shy of around $39,000, so not too bad. So getting into some of the different costs, again, it's going to look very similar to the last example. Service fees, you've got to pay our maids, property management service. Left us with around $30,000 gross profit. Okay, management fees, that's the actual disbursements that go to my client. We had to refund a guest another time. Long story short, to the business, we made around $8,100 on this in 6 months, 21% profit margin on just shy of 39 grand. So the numbers obviously would have been a lot better if we had kept that $40,000 booking, but overall, it's still very early in the life of the management of this property. So looking to 2023, are we going to do anything different? No, we're going to continue to manage it, see what happens, weigh the headache to income ratio and go from there. So
obviously we talked earlier on the video about one of the things that is really important, when you're identifying specific markets to target is who is your demographic. The best thing to do with short-term rentals, in my opinion, obviously, is just to capture people that are already going to a specific destination as opposed to trying to draw people there. So do you have any examples of that up there in your markets, any that you're involved in, that you specifically went after because they are that vacation destination or because they are, conference driven for, business conferences and the like?
Absolutely, yeah. So I have it on my screen here right now. So we're going to walk through that example just next.
Great.
So one of the transitions we had over the last, I would say, year and a half in our business, because we started off on controlling but not owning properties. Now, a goal we had for a long time was we wanted to start acquiring real estate. And this is just more from a long-term wealth building perspective, but also from a lifestyle perspective, because the properties we started buying were located in a market called Canmore, Alberta. Okay, you can see that here in the listing. And what's unique about this, it's a very small little town. There's only like 10,000 people that live there. But if you've been to Canada, you'll understand really quickly what is so unique about this area. It is so this is within the Bow Valley inside of Alberta. The scenery there it's irreplaceable. You cannot. It's actually kind of hard to describe how stunningly beautiful it is there. But what was unique about this was the reason why we bought here was a few different reasons. One, from a lifestyle perspective, we actually went to the mountains several times a year. So we're like, well, heck, we'd love to own a property in an area that we frequent so that, if we need a place to stay, we can obviously, use it up for our own purposes. But as we peeled back the layers of the onion more and more, we just found some of the just very appealing characteristics as to why this was going to be a good investment for us. So one, very short-term rental friendly market. This market is driven entirely almost by tourism. It is the lifeblood of what keeps this town tick. So in terms of the regulations there, it is strictly enforced, but they actually had short-term rental specific zoning for it. Okay, so because there's specific zoning and specific corridors of the city, there's almost zero chance they're ever going to change that because they know just how important it is to have that tourism dollar flooding through their economy. Okay. The other thing that we noticed was Canmore's, it's not a new story. It's been around for a long time, but a lot of operators that were competing against this market, what's interesting is that it almost has as many listings as Edmonton does, even though it's like 1% of the size in terms of population. So it's a very competitive market. So because it's competitive, we wanted to find different things that we could do in order to stand out, in order to really compete at a big level. Okay. So part of our analysis was we knew regulations, it was top shelf. There's constant demand on this market because people flood through this town all the time. And we knew it was going to be a safe long-term bet, but how are we going to differentiate ourselves? Well, as we were going through the research process, what we discovered was, again, most of the competition in this market was, again, in the 1 and 2 bedroom space, because actually buying a property here is actually really hard to do, Michael. The banks, you had to come up with a 35% down payment. So you got to have a lot of chips in order to even just get into this market to begin with. Okay. Now, when we acquired this unit, so this was about over a year ago now. Okay. So we've had a full 12 months on it. So let's dive into the financial statement. Now, the numbers on this are actually going to look pretty appealing for the audience. Okay. So this was our last 12 rolling months on this particular property. Okay. So in terms of income, again, compared to, some of the best properties in Edmonton cannot even hold a candle to some of the numbers that we get in this market. So this is just a simple 2-bed, 2-bath townhouse. But what we did in order to differentiate it, we actually increased the sleeping capacity by having a bunk bed, by having a sofa bed. So we can actually sleep 10 people under this roof. And what's good about that is, if ski groups are coming in, and larger, if there's more than one family, we can have them all under one roof and they can split the cost. Okay. Anyways, without digressing, this property did just shy of $134,000 in revenue for us last year. So break that down, that's roughly 11-ish grand a month, give or take. So not too shabby, right? Again, a lot of the numbers you're going to see here are almost very identical to what you're going to see on some of the past examples. Okay. Now, just diving a little bit further into this, this property actually generated, bottom line after all expenses were paid, just shy of 70 grand to the bottom. So over a 52% profit margin for us. So this is a very, very good unit for us in our portfolio. And in fact, if you look a little bit deeper here, our accountant, because we had our year end, this is, without getting into all the details, he charged depreciation on this. So that when you actually back that out, because depreciation is a non-cash expense, the profit margin on this property was actually 62% after all bills were paid. So pretty attractive.
That's a smoker.
This has been a very, very good investment for us.
Yeah, fantastic. So obviously identifying great destination spots like that, you guys have identified that and you're filling out your portfolio. That was a smoking deal. I mean, $130,000 on that investment, great bottom line cash flow on that, and obviously a super healthy return. Additionally, you guys operate in places where they're business friendly or business destinations as far as conferences and the like. Those are great places to have short-term rentals as well, right?
Absolutely. And this is really important, especially for anyone that's looking to get into this industry. And this is a question we encourage all of our students to really think about and ask themselves when they're getting into this, because if you're just really thinking about how much money can you make versus the type of clients and the types of customers you want to help and serve, you're gonna get weeded out of this industry very quickly, okay? Because you really have to come from a place of service and a place of really actually wanting to help people and add value if you really want to stand out and be able to compete at a high level in this business, okay? But to give an example on this, a lot of people think that, man, do I have to be in like a sunny destination or a vacation spot or something that has a lot of tourism draw in order to make this work? The answer is no, no, and no, okay? I'm going to give you an example in our own portfolio. So circling back up into Edmonton, again, this is not a tourism market. I mean, sure, at one time, we had the biggest mall in the world. I think we've been eclipsed by that many times over by other countries. But what's interesting about the story I'm going to tell next is this will really highlight a whole other opportunity that I think a lot of people are completely missing within short-term rentals, especially within this industry, okay? So on this particular property, again, this is actually a property that I used to live in myself. This was my personal residence, but then we ended up turning it into a long-term rental. That's a whole other story. That'll be another video for another time, Michael. But we eventually turned it into a short-term rental, okay? Now, what happened on this particular property was we ended up getting a booking last year for 6 months from a work crew that was coming into town. And what was going on is they were actually building, they were part of a construction crew that was building an Amazon fulfillment center in our city, okay? But they locked this property up for 6 months And let's dive into some of the numbers there. Now, I have numbers here from April to December. The reason why is because we used to have this property in a different business entity. We rolled it into another one. So without getting it like super complicated, we just use the numbers from when we made that transition. So just want to be 100% clear and transparent on that for any of the viewing audience. Okay. So when this booking came in, this is around April, May of last year, they booked my property for 6 months for over $6,000 a month. Okay. My operating costs on this property, so between my mortgage, my property taxes, my utilities, all of those other things, is right around $200 to $2,300 a month. Okay. So on a net cash flow basis, I was earning around $3,000 to $3,500 a month, just like clockwork on the property. So this is more of what you would call, instead of you have long-term rentals, which is, typically 12 months, and you have a lease with the tenant. Short-term is really anything under 30 days. This was more in what is now starting to become a lot more popular, which is called the midterm rental industry, or the mid-stay industry, people call it. So anything like month-to-month or 30+ day reservations. Okay. So getting into some of the numbers here is pretty simple, because this booking came from Airbnb. That was the only booking source that we had for really all of the entire calendar, because as soon as they booked it, we were just getting a transfer into our account every month for right around $6,000 a month, give or take. Okay. Service fees coming off. I barely had, we had sent our cleaning team there just a couple of times because they were just really nice guests, and we wanted to give a good service to them. Now, rent or lease. Now, a lot of people might be wondering, well, wait a second, I thought you owned this property. Why is there rent or lease in there? Well, personally, what we do is I actually rent the property from the company to generate rental income to me personally. So that creates additional write-offs for the business. And then I can use depreciation to basically wipe out all of the tax I have to pay on that income. Okay. So when you start to own property, you can get a little bit creative in terms of how you handle some of the income and expenses that come through on there. Now, what was interesting, because everyone always likes, when you first hear the initial stages of that story, you might think, wow, like that's about as close to passive income as you can possibly get. And I would agree with you, but what you'll notice, Michael, repairs and maintenance, almost $8,000. Okay. I had to redo the roof on this property this year. So now this property, it is a duplex. So I did share the cost by neighbors, around a $15,000, $16,000 touch, but everyone loves to talk about passive income, Michael. I'm going to tell you, on that day where I had to write that check, it did not feel very passive to me in that moment.
Yeah, that's not a fun check to write, of course, but hey, that's the cost of doing business. You're not going to have to replace that roof again, obviously, anytime soon. But it is what it is.
It is what it is. Yeah. So just to kind of run through the rest of this, some viewers might find this fascinating, others might be bored to tears. So we'll just get straight to the point. Okay. So obviously we had some supplies in there as well. The guest actually ended up buying a lot of their own supplies. So that's actually really another attractive dynamic of the midterm rental space, that it's actually a lot easier type of rental to run, because guests will typically get their own supplies. I think I talked to this guest twice within a 6-month period. So it took up almost none of my time. Now, a couple other things. So property insurance on this property, we got a really good deal with a local carrier here. So it's not a tremendous cost to me personally. Utilities, pretty reasonable. So after all that was taken into account, even still after a relatively large amount of CapEx that I had on this property, we still did 35% to the bottom line. And that's in addition to me taking a nice income from this as well, in terms of the lease that I charge back to myself in order to reduce some of the overhead. So again, another wonderful example, I guess you could say, of just different ways and different means of how you can make money in this industry.
Yeah, and I love you diving into the different property types, the different examples, and ultimately how you guys went through your thought process up front and identifying these properties and why, and then just lifting up the hood here and showing us the actual financials, so everyone is seeing them for themselves. It's not talk. You guys are doing these deals. So guys, if you're watching, you've been on the fence, or you're seeing this for the first time, you want more information, or you already know based on what you've seen that you're interested in moving forward with the BNB Bootcamp, go ahead and email bnbbootcamp@vipfinancialeducation.com. Be sure to include your first, your last name, the best number to reach you in the body of the email, and BNB Bootcamp conversation in the subject line, and someone from Michael and Katrina's team will get back in touch with you ASAP. You mentioned earlier in the video about trimming some of the fat. So you recognize that those weren't necessarily going to be the best properties for you. At that point, you guys decided to cut bait. It sounds like the one that had some challenges getting access to the property was a no-brainer. On some of the other properties, when you're seeing that they're not necessarily up to snuff, or they're not meeting the benchmarks that you guys have set, or it's not generating the revenue that you had anticipated, what are some moves that you guys can make or have made to try and prop those properties up a little bit better? There's a lot of information out there right now of folks that got involved in the STR market and the self-management of their properties during the pandemic that are now running into some massive challenges with bookings. Some people are referring to it. There's a viral thread out there, the Airbnb bust, which I don't subscribe to that. I mean, our luxury short-term rental management company is absolutely booming. The STR space in general is booming, but what would you say to that?
Well, I think what's interesting about it is when you actually peel back all of the complaints of hosts that are maybe going through a slower time in this industry, what you really start to discover is that there was a huge influx of hosts that got into this industry, like I said earlier, for all of the wrong reasons, self-serving interests, no desire at all about actually serving a customer, actually providing a unique experience for their guests. And then when you actually look at the listings that they have, what's interesting is that, because Airbnb is an algorithm, it's an interest algorithm, what has been quite self-evident for the last number of months here, because demand has started to slow down, and a lot of people have predicted this because we're probably going to see a little bit of a slower time in 2023, they are starting to prioritize giving the best properties up and serving that up in the algorithm first. So if your property is not top shelf, does not have anything unique about it, is cookie cutter, doesn't have a good design, doesn't have great reviews on it, you're not going to get that kind of bookings coming through. Okay, and it's not as a fault of the industry or Airbnb. Their company has very self-serving interests too. They want to give the best properties up at the best prices to give the guests that book on there the best experiences they possibly can. Okay. Now, having said that, there has been a lot of changes within the algorithm. So there has been things that we've had to do to adapt. So in 2023, there's a few properties that we've identified in our portfolio, just based on the amount of time that we've had them, amount of guests that we've had through. It's time we got to do a little bit of spring cleaning, and we got to do a little bit of a refresh on them. So there's a few properties that we have slated to go back through the design process once again, to have them kind of fresh and current for the up and coming year, in order to, again, stand out, be unique, really look at the amenities that we're offering our guests. How can we serve people at a higher level? How can we give a better experience? Because I can tell you, the overwhelming majority of people that get into this industry, they do not do that. They do not care about customer service. They do not care about having a unique experience for people. And that reflects in the amount of money that ends up showing up in their account at the end of the month, which for a lot of people right now is zero.
Yeah, no, 1,000%. We're hearing the horror stories out there every day as well. And to your point, it's you get the wrong property type from the outset, and you can do everything else right, and it's all for naught. You just make some of those critical errors throughout that process, and to your point, you can go to zero very quickly. All of these properties, were pent up with demand for during the pandemic, and it's starting to normalize right now. So if you're not providing a unique experience, if you're not getting those great guest reviews, you're going to be out of the game really quick. And for folks like us that are, doing business the right way and going above and beyond to try and provide that great experience for the guests, it's great for us. It's really trimming out the fat. So, I don't have a problem with it at all. I'm sure you don't. Guys, period. This, short-term rental game is not a get rich quick. It does require time, effort, energy to do what Michael and Katrina are doing and teaching people to do so successfully. It's no time to get cute. There's a lot of money to be made, but there's a lot lot of nuances involved with this, and there's some technical aspects that they can really drastically help you to reduce the learning curve on. So let's get kind of the nuts and bolts. So let's say someone's watched this, they've taken a look at your other videos. We'll obviously drop those playlists below. Someone calls you, what does that next step look like? And then what does the coaching itself all encompass? So if you can kind of give a brief snapshot on what next steps would look like for someone, and assuming they do decide to move forward, what does it kind of look like out of the gate, and what are some of the structures? What is some of the structure that you guys have in place in addition to the accountability piece, of course?
Absolutely, and I'm glad you asked. So in terms of what next steps look like, so if anyone's watched this episode or past episodes of us or seen examples of us coming onto the channel, and finally something has sparked enough interest to want you to reach out to ask for potentially our service and help, what it looks like from here is if we see your email come in, we will personally reach out to you and we'll book a consultation call, and there's no sales pressure here. We're just going to have a very candid, open conversation to see where you're at, what your goals are, what your challenges you're running into, and then see if we can help you bridge the gap. That's it, okay? Because we'll tell you right now, this is not a good fit for everyone, okay? Because as I mentioned earlier on the call, if you're not prepared to hustle, you're not prepared to put the work in, you're not prepared to really be teachable and learn and actually develop new set of skills, short-term rentals is not a passive strategy in the beginning, okay? You can make it more passive over time by installing different systems, having team members and processes, and having that all clearly documented. And we show people how to do that within the training. But again, if you're not willing to put the sweat equity in the beginning, this is definitely not the right fit for that kind of person. But for those that are really committed and they want to make 2023 a year to remember, to look back on when they watched this initial interview and said, that's the day that everything started to change, feel free to reach out to us at BNB Bootcamp at VIPfinancialeducation.com. That's BNB Bootcamp at VIPfinancialeducation.com, and we will personally get in touch with you to schedule that call. Now, in terms of the structure, as you had asked, of how the training is, essentially put together, a few different components. Okay, so when someone gets invited into our program, we have training modules, so online, so you can learn the material at your own pace. It's self-directed, and that's really the nuts and bolts of the how-to information. So, for anyone that's coming into this, if they just literally commit themselves, have a little bit of time every day, watch the videos, implement it, watch the videos, implement it, you'll have a very thriving business. That's the goal anyway by the end of the program. Now, of course, anyone that's going through this, there's going to be nuances, and we've used that word a few times on this call. You're going to have questions. There's going to be challenges that come up. There's going to be things that happen that you don't expect that you maybe need another set of eyes on in order to have some support around. So in addition to the weekly training modules, we hop on a call with all of our students once a week. The program itself is 4 months. So that's 16 calls that you have with myself and Katrina. And we are personally guiding you through every step of the program, every step of the process, because our entire intention and goal is that by the time you're done, we should have ideally at least one, if not several properties up and running, generating cash flow, taking in income. And you'll know exactly the nut and bolt mechanics of what it takes to then go take that process and to simply duplicate, rinse, and repeat. And then over time, it's just a matter of how many times you have to do that until you hit your income goal, okay? But inside of that, literally anything that you can think of in order to make the process easier. So we have, setup checklists, furnishing checklists, all the different tools and softwares and technologies we personally leverage in our business, step-by-step tutorials, how to set them up. And the final component is our community, okay? We do have a private Facebook members group. And I would say, if I was to take everything else out of it, and if we only had that, that would probably be worth more than the entire value of the program. Because when you're in the environment of like-minded people that are on the same trajectory, that are on the same journey, and are wanting to have a better life, and are wanting to really do something different, just being in that peer group of people that are taking that path, there's an enormous, they talk about the mastermind principles within the book, Think and Grow Rich. It is enormously powerful, okay? So to sum all that up, online training videos, weekly accountability calls and training, and our private Facebook group. And within that, all the different tools, resources, and checklists you need in order to go and have success. We've tried to make this as simple, as easy as possible. Now, we're not going to say it was easy. This obviously takes work. But for those that are ready to roll up their sleeves and get busy, we could potentially be a very good fit for that person.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. And again, we get time and time again, we're getting just positive feedback from our folks, which is why we continue to have you here on the channel. And you and Katrina have been gracious enough for our viewers to offer a discount. So I know that you guys are, there is scarcity. So you guys are, I believe, capping this at 10 per month for your next session. You only do one session a month. If you'd like to talk about the offer that you're willing to extend to our folks, and we certainly appreciate it.
Absolutely, yeah, and we have a very good relationship with you and Matt at VIP, so happy to discuss the mechanics of that. So normal retail price on this program is $15K, all right? But anyone that comes through the VIP financial education channel, we do give a discount, okay? So instead of coming in at 15, we do offer it for $99.97. We only take on 10 people a month, okay? Reason why that is because just from an overall fulfillment capacity, from a business standpoint, we can't provision the kind of care, attention, and level of support that we need if we're just taking on hordes and hordes and hordes of students, okay? If you're looking for something like that, I mean, there's tons of courses and stuff that you can find online that can give you something similar to that. But if you really want, direct contact and mentorship and have that ability to bounce ideas off of someone that's way ahead on their path and is looking back at where you're at and can tell you exactly what you need to do in order to get unstuck and to start getting traction, that's what we essentially provide within the BNB Bootcamp program.
Yeah, fantastic. And we certainly appreciate that discount, guys. And they do cap it at 10. So if you are interested in kicking the year off, so the next session would be starting for the month of February. So we're already a month in at that point into 2023. So if you want to take action, you really want to take control of your financial future starting in 2023, this may be the avenue for you. It certainly doesn't hurt to reach out and explore it. As always, do your own due diligence. We bring people on the channel that we've thoroughly vetted by design, but certainly go out there and do your own research. And obviously Michael and Katrina are an open book with their own numbers and their own portfolio, and they've proven today that they're happy to share. So thanks for joining us today. Would love to have you back on here in a few months, and would love to continue to bring your students on here. We love to get the testimonial feedback from them, the good, the bad, and the ugly. So in the meantime, guys, thanks for joining us here on the video today. If you want more content on the short-term rental space, and in particular BNB Bootcamp, go ahead and smash that thumbs up button below. We love new subscribers, so go ahead and subscribe and ding that bell notification if you want to see more videos from us here on the VIP Financial Education YouTube channel, where we help you go further, faster financially. Until next time, take care, make it a great day.